Seetha Spini, thank you very much for joining me today. For those of you who are watching, Seetha has a wealth of global HR executive experience, specifically within leadership development, culture, coaching, assessment, talent. The list is endless, across a number of different big organisations, notably Chubb Insurance and Realogy. It's going to be very hard, however, Seetha, not to speak about your Peace Corps experience. That will have to be another video interview, I think. So today we are going to be talking about leadership capability. I've said in previous videos that often HR has to hold up a mirror. I've changed that analogy a little bit, and I've decided that HR leadership is the mirror. In the spirit of Disney, my quote today is, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, what is the leadership capability of us all?" So, Seetha, how do you even start having the conversation with leadership about their capability?
Oh, well, first off, thank you, Olivia. I would say there's a couple of things. One, it's a matter of really first understanding not only the business and really understanding the business. I think sometimes we understand the competitive landscape, but we don't dive deep enough in understanding the nuances of the numbers. But then understanding their capability really gets at understanding where the organization is at the moment and its trajectory, and what is needed moving forward, and does that capability match up with the needs of the organization?
And so when you're looking at capability within an organization, where do you start?
Yeah, and so, for me, it's interesting. You can gain a lot of insight by not only having conversations with the leaders themselves, having them self-assess themselves. It's amazing. Many leaders will give you loads of information on where their faults are, if you ask them the right questions, but then also getting the perspective of the board, of the employees in the organization. I look at data coming in from all angles, not only self-assessment data, but the CEO's assessment of the C-suite and the employee's assessment of the organization. You can do that through many different kinds of survey mechanisms. But, oftentimes when you bring all of that data together, it paints a very interesting story. And that story, coupled with, external stakeholders and their view of the organization and how the organization is doing, does paint an interesting picture and can give you a very thorough assessment of the leadership in the company and whether or not it's meeting the needs of the organization, and how it would meet the needs of the organization moving forward.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at capability or lack thereof, we're assuming that there is a lack somewhere, and potential.
Mm.
Is there a correct balance between one and the other?
It's a great question, because I look at, given the competitive landscape, I think there are many industries that don't have the luxury of time, that their industries are evolving very quickly. And in order to stay competitive, they need to evolve very quickly. And so when I think about capability and potential, I'm looking at it from that lens. There are other industries that are slower moving, and they may need to change as well, but the pace at which they need to change just may be different. And so when I think about potential, I'm thinking about that for those industries. And so it really depends on the industry and that evolution of that industry and where the organization is in their trajectory.
So do you think we're in a time, an era of capability trumping potential because there's just so little time?
Yeah, I do actually. It's a good way to put it, because, I think those leaders who have a fair amount of self-awareness, they have constantly been monitoring the external landscape, and have an openness to thinking differently, and realize that they may themselves have blind spots. I mean, that's the first step, but that really goes a long way in supporting an organization. So they don't need to have all the answers, but if they have the self-awareness and the openness, then usually, there's a lot that we can do there.
And obviously we look at leadership capability on an individual level, and then we look at leadership capability at a group level, a systemic level. Is there a good leader, right? Do we have a profile of a great leader? And is that universal, or do you have to understand the culture of an organization first?
To me, culture is an outcome, and it's typically an outcome of the leadership in the organization. So, when I'm assessing leaders, I'm usually getting a very good sense of the culture at the same time. And so to me, it's hand in hand. That culture is the outcome of that leadership team. And so, I don't necessarily think you have to assess them separately. I think you pretty much gain a sense of it at the same time.
And then, you're getting a snapshot of that leadership population, their behavior, their style, which informs the culture of the business. But what about changing that culture? If it's toxic, if it's lacking, where, what comes that? Is that a simultaneous journey? How do you start changing that in Norma style?
Yeah, so I'll take, for example, if you look at cultures that are very caring, but need to be much more results oriented, right? And you see this in a lot of organizations that maybe have not had the urgency of change just yet, right? And you see many of those large scale organizations that had this caring culture, and there's nothing wrong with caring, but you have to couple that with performance, right, and results orientation. And so they may have swung too much to one side. So for me, again, it goes back to how much time do we have here? And there are times where you can move leaders along on that journey to be more performance or results oriented. But sometimes you just don't have the luxury of time, and you do need to make some leadership changes in order to get there quicker.
And how, as a function that enables that, you are the custodian of making these changes. How do you change that leadership, either by putting in new individuals, which are in line with the business strategy, which might need to be less caring, more results orientated? How do you do that and create the story that doesn't kill the culture, that everyone might really buy into?
It's interesting. To me, if you're more results oriented, you're maybe driving organic growth quicker. Results are coming in. You then have more of an ability to provide services to your employees, to provide better compensation, better benefits packages, and so to me, that lends itself to a more caring culture. It's just sort of starting with that results orientation versus starting with the caring piece. And that's where I think, companies can get a bit derailed if they're starting on the caring side and not really thinking about the orientation of the results. So, going back to your initial question, I think you really have to work with the board. When it comes to the C-suite, it's a matter of working with the board and the CEO and figuring out what's most critical. And there may be leaders that can come along on the journey, but there may be some that you need to, focus on first. So first, it is a prioritization process too. There's only so much change an organization can handle at once, and you have to be very mindful of that. And so that's another piece of this too.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because we're talking about really big issues here: behavioral change, capability of leadership, culture of organizations. But actually, Seetha, you talk about it in quite practical terms, outputs, results, prioritization. These are things that can have results. They're quite tangible, which actually is quite reassuring when you're thinking about the role of the HR leader in this space. Sometimes it can feel like an almost insurmountable task. I've got to change the organization for the better. I've got to influence culture. I've got to look at leadership capability and maybe change it. But actually, if you think about it in terms of what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to get there? Actually, everything you said is step by step achievable, and not maybe so scary.
It's not. And honestly, when I think about leadership capability, I do also look at how we honor the legacy of our leadership team, right? And so you may have individuals on the leadership team with a rich history in the organization and a lot of value that they can continue to add to the organization more in an advisory capacity. And so thinking about how you leverage and honor that that what is, while you're also bringing in potentially new leadership is another aspect of it, because I do think that's what sometimes you have a lot of fear around, but I think if you think about the change as just an evolution, and how do you bring all of your leaders along on that evolution, I think there are a lot of leaders who love the idea of moving from a doer to more of an advisory role. And so there's a lot of wonderful ways that you can work with a leadership team in helping them move along that journey at a faster pace as a CHRO or as a head of talent. It's actually quite fun, I think, to partner with a leadership team and a board on supporting that journey.
Brilliant. And I love the idea that you've just painted, that you don't need to destroy the past to bring in the future. You can live by the legacy and the things that were and the things that have been whilst you build the new. For me, that's a lovely way to finish. So thank you so much, Seetha. That has been a very enjoyable conversation, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you, Olivia.